It was a gray afternoon when Giulia received the call. The name Valentina flashed on her phone screen, and her heart skipped a beat. It had been years since their last meaningful conversation. Their contact had been reduced to formal messages on important dates, always carrying the invisible barrier of old wounds between them. Giulia hesitated before answering. "Valentina? What a surprise!" The voice on the other end sounded different, more tired, almost resigned. "Hi, Giulia. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I thought maybe we could meet." Giulia frowned, trying to interpret her sister's tone. "Of course. Do you want to come over? Or should we meet somewhere else? We can meet at the cafe near your house," Valentina suggested. "Agreed. See you in an hour," Giulia replied, feeling a mix of curiosity and concern as she hung up. When Giulia arrived at the cafe, she saw Valentina already seated at a table near the window. She was larger than Giulia remembered, her body almost cramped into the small chair. There was something in her eyes, a mix of sadness and the effort to pretend everything was fine. "Hi, Valentina," Giulia said, smiling as she approached. "Hi," Valentina replied, standing for a quick hug before sitting back down. Giulia observed her sister closely as she settled into the chair opposite. The last time they had met, Valentina had still seemed vibrant and full of life. Now, there was something heavy about her, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Are you okay?" Giulia asked directly. Valentina looked away, nervously fiddling with her bag strap. "Oh, I'm getting by. Things haven't been easy." As the conversation unfolded, Valentina revealed she was struggling at work and facing financial difficulties. But what struck Giulia was how her sister talked about food as something that filled a void, but also seemed to consume her from within. "I know I need to change," Valentina said with a forced smile. "But it's hard. When I'm nervous or sad, it's like only food understands me." Giulia felt a pang in her chest. For so long, she had kept her distance, focusing on her own life, without realizing how much her sister had been sinking. "Have you ever thought about seeking help?" Giulia asked, trying to sound encouraging. Valentina looked up, clearly uncomfortable. "Help? Like therapy? I don't know if that would work for me. My problem is more physical, you know?" Giulia gently shook her head. "I think it's more than that, Valentina. Maybe it's time to explore what's behind all of this." Later that same day, Giulia met with Clara for coffee, as she did every week. While they were catching up, Giulia mentioned her meeting with Valentina. "She's so different, Clara. It's like she's carrying a burden that's not just physical but emotional too. I don't know how to help her." Clara thought for a moment before suggesting, "What if she talked to Anna?" "I know it sounds obvious, but family constellations can reveal dynamics we don't always see on our own." Giulia frowned. "Do you think she'd agree?" Valentina might resist at first, but if you explain it carefully, she might open up. "Sometimes we need someone from the outside to show us what's holding us back," Clara replied. Giulia reflected on this for the rest of the day. Valentina had reached out by setting up that meeting. Maybe it was a sign she was ready to take the next step. That evening, Giulia called Valentina. "Val, I've been thinking about what you told me today. I think I might have an idea that could help." "I'm listening," Valentina replied hesitantly. "I have a friend who works with family constellations. It's a process that might help you understand why you feel this emotional weight, why food has become so important. There's nothing wrong with asking for help, you know?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Valentina sighed. "I don't know, Giulia. I don't want people to think I'm a lost cause." "No one will think that," Giulia replied quickly. "Valentina, you deserve to feel good. If this could be a start, why not try?" After a few more moments of hesitation, Valentina finally gave in. "Okay, I'll try." Giulia felt a mix of relief and hope. Maybe this was the beginning of the healing Valentina, so desperately needed. As she hung up the phone, Giulia couldn't help but wonder, is Valentina ready to face what the constellation might reveal? On the other side of the city, Valentina stared at her phone screen, feeling the weight of her decision. She knew something needed to change. The constellation would be the first step, but she had no idea what she would find. It was a cold evening when Valentina arrived at Giulia's house for dinner. Giulia had prepared a light meal, trying to make her sister feel comfortable. Valentina, however, seemed restless, as if carrying an invisible burden. "You're early," Giulia said with a smile, drying her hands on her apron. "I wanted to avoid traffic," Valentina replied, settling into the chair in the living room. She looked around, noticing the impeccable decor. Everything seemed so orderly, so different from her own reality. As they ate, the conversation started lightly, with Giulia talking about work and her friends, but Valentina soon withdrew. "And you, Val? How are things at work?" Giulia asked, trying to include her sister. Valentina shrugged, pushing her food around with her fork. "Normal, I guess. Nothing too interesting." Giulia frowned. "And how are you feeling? Have you thought about what we talked about seeking help?" Valentina sighed, pushing her plate away. "Do you want to know how I feel, Giulia? I feel like everyone is moving forward except me. Just look at you, beautiful house, amazing friends, perfect life. And me. I'm just me." Giulia blinked, surprised by the bitterness in her sister's tone. "Val, I don't think that about you. I just want to help," Valentina continued, unable to hold back the words that had been stuck for years. "Do you know what bothers me the most? You left. You moved on with your life, leaving everything behind. And who was left to clean up the mess? Me. Always me." Giulia felt a lump form in her throat. "I didn't leave to abandon you, Valentina. I was trying to survive, to do something for myself. And you think I didn't want that too?" Valentina retorted, standing up from the table. "You never looked back, Giulia. You never asked how I was. It was like, to you, I didn't even exist." Giulia stood up, trying to hold back the wave of guilt and anger rising inside her. "That's not true, Valentina. I care about you. I've always cared. But I couldn't stay stuck in the past, reliving the same problems, especially after Dad left us." At the mention of their father, Valentina froze. Her expression shifted from anger to something deeper, a pain she seemed to have carried for a long time. "It's always about him, isn't it?" Valentina said, her voice trembling. "He left and suddenly everything fell apart. You ran away to save yourself, and I stayed there, trying to pick up the pieces for Mom. But no one ever asked how I felt." Giulia felt tears begin to form, but forced herself to speak. "I suffered from his leaving too, Val. I just dealt with it differently. But if you felt alone, I'm sorry. That was never my intention." Valentina didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her bag and walked toward the door. "Thanks for dinner, Giulia. But I think I'd better go." Later that night, Giulia confided in Clara about the dinner. "I didn't know Valentina carried so much resentment," Giulia said, wiping her eyes. "She's always been so closed off. Now it seems like everything is coming out all at once." Clara pondered, choosing her words carefully. Maybe that's a good sign. If she's starting to talk about how she feels, it means she's recognizing the weight she's carrying. You know that's essential for her to change, right? Giulia nodded, her heart still heavy. "I know, Clara, but it's not easy to hear all of this. Part of me knows she's right. I really did distance myself, but I was also trying to survive." Clara placed a comforting hand on Giulia's. "Giulia, you did what you had to do, but now you have the chance to truly be there for her. Sometimes, the pain needs to come out before we can rebuild anything." Giulia took a deep breath, processing her friend's words. "I just want her to know I'm here now. I don't know if that will be enough, but it's what I can offer." Meanwhile, Valentina was in her small apartment. Sitting on the couch, She held a package of cookies, eating one after another without even tasting them. Her thoughts swirled. Giulia's words, memories of their father, the inescapable loneliness. She looked at the pile of dirty dishes in the sink and her reflection in the hallway mirror. How did I get here? She whispered to herself as silent tears rolled down her face. Valentina set the package of cookies aside, feeling suffocated. For the first time, she acknowledged that maybe she needed more than just her willpower. Maybe Giulia was right. Something in her story was keeping her stuck. The next day, as she walked to work, Valentina picked up the phone and called Giulia. "Hi, Val," Giulia answered cautiously, still thinking about the previous night's argument. I want to try," Valentina said hesitantly. "The family constellation. Maybe it's what I need." Giulia felt her heart warm at the possibility of helping her sister. "I'm so glad to hear that, Val. I can book a session with Anna for you." "It's a start," Valentina agreed. Despite her fear, something inside her knew it was time to face the past, no matter how painful it might be. Valentina was sitting on the couch in Anna's office, clutching her bag tightly in her lap. The space was cozy, with warm lighting and a bookshelf full of books. Valentina looked around, avoiding eye contact with the therapist, who observed her patiently. "Welcome, Valentina," Anna said in a calm and reassuring tone. "Giulia told me a bit about you. I'm glad you decided to come." Valentina forced a smile, still feeling uneasy. "I don't know if this will work, but here I am." Anna nodded, sensing her initial resistance. "Coming here is already a big step. Let's start at the beginning. Tell me about yourself. What brought you here today?" Valentina hesitated, fiddling with her bag strap before responding. "I don't know where to start. My sister thinks I need help. I know I have issues with food. I always have. But I think it's just a matter of self-control. Nothing too deep." Anna leaned slightly forward, her tone remaining soft. "Maybe it is. But sometimes the way we deal with food can reflect something much bigger. Have you ever wondered what food represents for you?" Valentina looked down at the floor, thinking for a moment. "Comfort, I guess. When everything is hard, it's there. It's always been there." "I see," Anna said with a slight smile. "And what in your life do you feel needs comforting?" Valentina took a deep breath, feeling like something inside her was about to surface. "My childhood was complicated. My father left when I was 7. After that, everything seemed to fall apart. My mother became bitter, always worried about money, and my sister, well, Giulia ran away from it all. She went on with her life while I stayed behind." "And how did that make you feel?" Anna asked, watching her carefully. "Like no one cared. Like I had to be strong for everyone. And I think food became my way of coping. At least it didn't leave." Anna nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "That makes a lot of sense, Valentina. You felt alone and overwhelmed, and you found something that made you feel safe, even if only for a moment." Anna picked up some markers to start the family constellation. "Valentina, I'd like to try something that might help us visualize these dynamics. I'll place these markers on the table to represent you, your sister, your mother, and your father. I want you to tell me how you see them." Valentina watched as Anna placed the markers. She moved Valentina's marker close to her mother's, leaving Giulia's farther away and her father's distant, almost outside the setup. "What do you feel looking at this?" Anna asked. Valentina swallowed hard. "It makes sense. Mom and I were always together, but not in a healthy way. Giulia was always far away, and my dad, well, he doesn't even feel like part of the picture." "And what's it like being so close to your mother?" Anna asked. "Exhausting," Valentina replied without hesitation. "I feel like I have to take care of her. Like it's my responsibility to make up for what my dad left behind." Anna moved the father's marker closer, placing it next to the mother's. "And now, how does it feel to see him closer?" Valentina tensed, her hands clutching her bag again. I don't know. It feels wrong. He left. He doesn't deserve to be there. Anna tilted her head. Maybe he left physically, but that doesn't mean he's not part of your story. Often we carry the weight of trying to fill the voids left by our parents. Could it be that your relationship with food has something to do with that? Valentina remained silent, but something inside her seemed to crack. Anna paused before continuing. Valentina, you might be trying to carry the pain of your father's absence, as if it's your responsibility to hold everything together. But that was never your role. You were just a child. Valentina felt tears begin to silently fall down her face. I know that, but I've never felt it. I've always thought that if I were strong enough, my mom would be okay. That somehow, I had to make up for everything. Anna moved Valentina's marker slightly back, creating space between her and her mother. And what if you allowed yourself to just be you? What if you let your mother deal with her pain while you take care of your own? Valentina looked at the setup, her eyes still watery. That feels so light, but also scary. I understand, Anna said with a kind smile. Lightness can feel unfamiliar when we're used to carrying so much weight. But it's possible to get there one step at a time. When the session ended, Valentina thanked Anna and left the office feeling emotionally drained, but also relieved. It was as if something inside her had finally found a crack, letting a little light in. As she walked home, Valentina thought about Anna's words. Maybe it was time to let go of the responsibilities that had never been hers. And maybe, just maybe, it was possible to start over. Valentina continued, her voice trembling. I think in my mind I saw her as someone who abandoned me. But now, looking at it, I see she just did what I never had the courage to do. She chose to live her own life. Anna nodded, moving Valentina's piece slightly back, creating space between her and her mother. And now, how do you feel about your mother? Valentina observed the setup in silence. Less trapped. I still feel like I'm somehow responsible for her. But maybe I don't have to be so close. It's strange, but it also feels more right. Anna adjusted Giulia's piece, bringing it closer to Valentina. Now, let's look at the relationship between you and your sister. How does it feel to see her closer? Valentina hesitated, as if grappling with conflicting emotions. I feel like I always wanted her closer. But at the same time, I resent it because when she was there, it felt like it was never enough. Anna positioned Giulia's piece next to Valentina's, but tilted it slightly forward. What if she was trying to help, just in a way different from what you expected? Valentina stared at the setup, a single tear sliding down her face. I never thought of it that way. I always believed she stayed away because she wanted to. But maybe she just didn't know how to help me. Anna smiled gently. Very often we project our pain onto others. But in reality, each of us is trying to deal with our own burdens. Anna placed another piece to represent food, positioning it near Valentina. And now, what do you feel looking at this? Valentina sighed, her eyes fixed on the piece. It feels like a shield, like it's between me and all of this. Between me and the pain. Between me and what I feel about Giulia and Mom. Anna nodded, adjusting the piece slightly. And what if you didn't need that shield? What would change? Valentina shook her head, visibly emotional. I don't know. I think I wouldn't know how to handle everything without it. Anna, with patience, replied, maybe that's why you haven't let it go yet. But that's okay, Valentina. Recognizing the role it plays is already a big step. And little by little, you can discover how to deal with these emotions differently. Anna brought the father's piece closer to the setup, but still kept it at a distance from Valentina. Let's look at him again. What do you feel seeing him here? Valentina clasped her hands tightly in her lap, struggling with the anger she still carried. I feel like he doesn't deserve to be here. He left us. He's the reason for all of this. Anna remained silent for a moment, allowing Valentina to process. Then, she gently responded, "And what if your father's abandonment wasn't your responsibility, Valentina? What would change if you could simply acknowledge what he did, but leave the weight of that with him?" Valentina looked at the piece, tears in her eyes, as if something inside her was beginning to unravel. "I don't know. I've always believed that if I were enough, he would have stayed. But maybe this was never about me." Anna nodded. "You're right. He made his choices, and they belong to him, not to you. What you can do now is free yourself from that weight and decide how you want to move forward." Anna moved Valentina's piece closer to Giulia's, creating balance between the sisters. "And you too. How does this feel now?" Giulia and Valentina exchanged glances, and Giulia answered, "I feel like we can truly be together now, without the weight of the past between us." Valentina nodded, a faint smile forming on her face. "Yes, it feels lighter." Anna adjusted all the pieces, creating a final setup where each woman was balanced, with the father distant but acknowledged in his place. "This is your family now, each of you in your rightful place, each with your own space, and with the possibility of looking toward the future without carrying what doesn't belong to you." Valentina wiped away her tears, but there was a sense of relief in her expression. "It feels like we can be together in a different way, without so many expectations, without so much weight." Anna smiled, satisfied with the progress. "The bond between you two is strong, but like all relationships, it needs space to breathe and grow. And you're beginning to build that now." When the session ended, Valentina and Giulia sat quietly in the office for a few minutes, processing everything they had seen and felt. "That was much more than I expected," Valentina said, her voice hoarse with emotion. Giulia nodded, smiling. "I feel like we're finally finding a path. Thank you for doing this with me." "Thank you for being here," Valentina replied. The two left the office together, walking side by side along the sidewalk lit by the fading afternoon light. For the first time in a long while, they felt truly connected. As they walked, Valentina looked at Giulia and asked, "Do you think Mom would do a constellation with us?" Giulia smiled. "Maybe. Who knows? But for now, I think we've taken a huge step. And if their mother agreed to join, what more could this constellation reveal about the family's wounds and secrets?" It was a sunny afternoon when Giulia opened her door to Valentina. Despite the smile she offered her sister, she couldn't help but notice the unease on Valentina's face. There was something different about her, a mix of hesitation and determination. "Hi Val. I'm glad you came," Giulia said, stepping aside to let her sister in. Valentina took off her shoes automatically and followed Giulia to the living room, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. "I need to talk to you," Valentina said as she sat on the couch. She looked nervous, but her voice was steady. Giulia sat across from her in the armchair, sensing that something important was about to be said. Valentina began speaking slowly, as if carefully choosing every word. "I wanted to thank you for introducing me to Anna and the family constellations. It's been harder than I expected, but it's also helping me see things I've never realized before." Giulia smiled softly. "I'm so glad to hear that. I knew it would be an intense process, but you're stronger than you think, Val." Valentina looked away for a moment, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. "Giulia, I need to tell you something. For a long time, I carried a lot of anger toward you. I thought you abandoned me, that you left me alone to deal with everything." Giulia felt a tightness in her chest, but waited for Valentina to continue. "But now I understand that you were trying to survive too, and maybe I projected a lot of things onto you that weren't your fault. I just wanted you to know that." Giulia blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears threatening to fall. "Valentina, I never knew you felt all of this. But I understand. And to be honest, I felt guilty too. So many times I thought about coming back, but I was afraid it would only make things worse. So I stayed away because it seemed easier. Valentina looked at her sister, surprised. You felt guilty? Giulia nodded, now letting the tears flow. Yes, always. And I think that's why I tried to make up for it by staying even more distant. But looking back, I see that only hurt us more. Valentina quickly wiped her eyes, as if she didn't want Giulia to see her vulnerability. But her voice was filled with emotion. I want you to know that I don't blame you anymore. I think I'm finally learning that our choices were just different ways of dealing with the same pain. Silence fell between them for a few moments before Giulia broke it. I remember the day Dad left. You were so little, but I can still hear you crying in your room. Valentina looked at her sister, surprised. You remember that? I do. And I think that's when everything changed. He left us, but he also left us with a hole we never managed to fill. I left because I felt I didn't have the strength to stay, and you stayed, trying to hold everything together. Neither of us was to blame. Valentina nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words. And Mom, I think she did her best, but she was as lost as we were. It felt like everything fell apart at once. Yes, Giulia said, taking Valentina's hand. But that doesn't mean we have to keep carrying these broken pieces. We can leave them behind. Giulia squeezed her sister's hand with a smile full of tenderness. Val, I want you to know that I'm here now. Really, I want us to rebuild what was lost. Valentina took a deep breath, feeling tears welling up again. I want that too. I want us to be real sisters, without carrying all this weight from the past. The two embraced, a hug filled with meaning. It wasn't just a physical gesture, but a silent promise of a new beginning. As they sipped coffee, they began talking about small things. Movies Valentina wanted to watch, recipes Giulia wanted to try. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they were slowly returning to a safe place. Do you think Anna would agree to do a constellation with us together? Valentina asked, playing with the rim of her cup. Giulia smiled. I'm sure she would. And I think it would be amazing. It's another step we can take together. Valentina nodded, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she felt connected to Giulia, not out of obligation or guilt, but through a real and genuine bond. When Giulia walked Valentina to the door, both knew there was still a lot of work to do. But for the first time, the path seemed clearer. What would the next constellation reveal? And how would it help solidify the new relationship between the sisters? Valentina and Giulia arrived at Anna's office in the late afternoon. The welcoming environment was now familiar to Valentina, but for Giulia, everything felt new and slightly intimidating. She looked at the markers on the table and at Anna's calm expression, feeling both curious and anxious. Thank you for seeing us together, Anna, Giulia said, trying to break the ice. Anna smiled, gesturing for both of them to sit. It's my pleasure, Giulia. And I'm really happy you decided to explore this journey together. How are you feeling? Valentina shrugged, but her voice was firm. A bit nervous but ready. Giulia nodded, agreeing. Same here. I think there's a lot we need to understand. Anna began arranging the markers on the table. She placed one to represent Giulia, another for Valentina, and a third for their mother. Farther away, she positioned a marker for their father, leaving it in a corner, like a shadow watching over. What do you feel when you look at this? Anna asked. Giulia was the first to speak. It feels familiar. Valentina has always been closer to Mom. I've always been distant, trying to keep my own life separate. Valentina looked at the setup, frowning slightly. I feel like Mom always needed me, but also that I was never enough. And Dad there in the corner. That's how he's always been. Out of reach. Anna adjusted the markers, moving Valentina slightly farther back, creating space between her and her mother. And if you could step back a little, how does that feel now? Valentina took a deep breath. It feels lighter, but also strange. Like I'm leaving something behind. Anna looked at her with understanding. You're not leaving anything behind, Valentina. You're simply giving back a weight that isn't yours to carry. Anna moved Giulia's marker closer, positioning it next to Valentina's. And now, how do you feel looking at this? Giulia hesitated before answering. It feels right. I think I never realized how much Valentina wanted me to be close. I always thought keeping my distance was best for both of us. Valentina looked at Giulia's marker beside hers, and silent tears began to roll down her face. I just wanted you to be there, Giulia. But I think I never really said that. Giulia reached out and held her sister's hand tightly. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I was so focused on running from what hurt me that I didn't realize you needed me. Anna brought the father's marker closer, positioning it near the mother. And now, how do you feel seeing him here? Valentina swallowed hard, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. He doesn't deserve to be here. He left, and that's what started all of this. Giulia looked at the marker with a softer expression. I feel something different. For a long time I blamed him too. But now I see that what he did doesn't define who we are. He made bad choices. But that doesn't mean we have to keep living under their shadow. Anna nodded, moving the father's marker to a neutral position, closer but not invasive. And what if you could acknowledge his place in your story, without carrying the pain he left? What would change? Valentina took a deep breath, feeling the impact of Anna's words. It feels possible, but I don't know how to do it. Anna responded gently. It's not something that happens all at once, but recognizing that his abandonment is not your responsibility is already a big step. Anna turned her attention back to Valentina and Giulia's markers, placing them side by side, but now balanced with the mother's. And now, what do you feel looking at this? Valentina wiped her tears, but a faint smile appeared on her face. I feel like we can be together in a different way, without so many expectations, without so much weight. Giulia squeezed her sister's hand again. And I feel like I want to be more present for you, Val. Really? Anna smiled, satisfied with their progress. The bond between you two is strong. But like all relationships, it needs space to breathe and grow. And you're starting to build that now. When the constellation ended, Valentina and Giulia sat quietly in the office for a few minutes, processing everything they had seen and felt. That was much more than I expected, Valentina said, her voice hoarse with emotion. Giulia nodded, smiling. I feel like we're finally finding a path. Thank you for doing this with me. Thank you for being here, Valentina replied. The two left the office together, walking side by side along the sidewalk lit by the fading afternoon light. For the first time in a long while, they felt truly connected. As they walked, Valentina looked at Giulia and asked, Do you think Mom would do a constellation with us? Giulia smiled. Maybe. Who knows? But for now, I think we've taken a huge step. And if their mother agreed to join, what more could this constellation reveal about the family's wounds and secrets? It was a quiet morning when Valentina and Giulia decided to visit their mother. The house they grew up in seemed smaller than they remembered, but the details were still the same. The old photos on the walls, the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Their mother, Clara, was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. She seemed surprised to see both daughters standing together at the door. Giulia, Valentina, what a wonderful surprise, Clara exclaimed, smiling warmly. Hi, Mom, Valentina said, walking over to hug her. Giulia followed shortly after. As Clara served coffee and biscuits, Valentina exchanged a glance with Giulia, trying to summon the courage to start the conversation they both knew needed to happen. After a few minutes of small talk, Valentina took a deep breath. Mom, we need to talk to you about some things about the past. Clara frowned slightly, curious but cautious. The past? About what exactly? Giulia stepped in to support her sister. about how things changed after Dad left, about how each of us dealt with it differently. Clara stayed silent, her expression becoming more serious. I knew you both suffered, but I thought it was behind us now. After all, life moved on, didn't it? Yes, Mom. But keeping all of this inside without addressing it left us with a lot of wounds, Valentina said calmly but firmly. And now, with Anna's help, I'm starting to understand how it still affects us. Clara held her coffee cup tightly, visibly uneasy. Anna? Who is Anna? A therapist, Giulia explained. Valentina started doing family constellations with her, and it's helped her a lot. We even did a session together. It was transformative. Clara sighed, setting her cup down on the table. I know you both went through a lot when he left us. And honestly, I suffered too. But at the time, I was so lost I didn't know how to deal with my pain, let alone yours. Valentina nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I always felt like I had to take care of you, Mom. Like it was my responsibility to hold everything together. Clara looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes. Valentina, you should never have had to carry that weight. It wasn't your responsibility. I know that now, Valentina replied gently. But back then, it felt like it was. And I think it also kept me from connecting with Giulia. Giulia took the opportunity to speak. Mom, I ran away because I didn't know how to handle what was happening. I've always felt like I let you down. But now I understand that I was trying to protect myself. Clara wiped away the tears streaming silently down her face. I didn't want you to feel this way. I thought I was being strong for you. But now I see I failed to show that I needed help too. Valentina looked at Giulia, who gave her a small nod before speaking. Mom, that's why we want to invite you to do a family constellation with us. It's not to blame you for anything, but to better understand what happened and how we can move forward. Clara sat in silence, stirring her coffee with a spoon. After a moment, she sighed deeply. I don't know, girls. Therapy has never been something I considered for myself. I've always thought the best way to get through something was to move on. But did we really? Giulia asked gently. Or did we just push everything under the rug? Clara looked at her daughters, her face full of conflicting emotions. And you really think this could help? Valentina took her mother's hand. I know it can help, Mom, because it's already helping me. Clara sighed again, looking at the hands of her daughters holding hers. If this is important to you, then I'll try. For you, Giulia smiled, feeling a wave of relief. Thank you, Mom. It means a lot to us. Clara tried to smile, but her expression still betrayed her nervousness. I just hope this doesn't bring up things I don't want to remember. Valentina responded in a soft tone. Mom, we've already lived through those things. What the constellation does is help us understand them, so we can let go of what weighs us down. Clara nodded slowly, as if processing the words. Before they left, Clara hugged her daughters tightly, something she hadn't done in years. I love you, girls. Even if I haven't shown it the right way, I've always loved you. We love you too, Mom. Giulia and Valentina replied almost in unison, laughing immediately after. As they walked together to the car, Valentina looked at Giulia and smiled. I never thought she'd agree. Neither did I, Giulia admitted. But I think we're finally finding a way to rebuild all of this. Valentina looked up at the sky, where the sun was beginning to set, painting the horizon with golden hues. For the first time in years, she felt the light beginning to shine into her life. Anna's office seemed brighter than usual as Clara, Giulia, and Valentina entered together. Clara looked around, visibly uncomfortable. It's cozy here, she said, trying to break the silence. Yes, and Anna is amazing. You'll feel comfortable, Valentina replied, gently holding her mother's arm in a reassuring gesture. Anna appeared shortly after, her warm smile welcoming them. Welcome. It's wonderful to have all three of you here today. Are you ready to explore more about your family story? Clara nodded slowly, still uncertain. I'm here because they insisted. I hope this will be useful. I believe it will be, Anna replied calmly. Let's start at the beginning. Anna arranged the pieces on the table, one for each of them, and one for the absent father. She also placed a larger piece to represent the family as a whole. I want you to look at this and tell me how it feels, Anna asked. Clara was the first to speak, surprising her daughters. I see a broken family. When he left us, I felt destroyed. I tried to keep everything together, but I think I failed. Valentina took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. Mom, you did your best, but I felt like I had to take care of you, as if it were my responsibility to keep everything together. Clara looked at her daughter, tears welling in her eyes. And I didn't realize how much it was weighing on you. I thought I was being strong for both of us. But I see now that I put you in a role that wasn't yours. Anna moved Giulia's piece to a more distant position from the family unit. And you, Giulia? How does this feel? Giulia observed in silence before replying. It feels right. I've always felt like an outsider, as if there was no space for me. So, I distanced myself. Anna adjusted Giulia's piece closer to the others, but still slightly tilted to the side. And if there had been space for you, what would have changed? Giulia took a deep breath. Maybe I wouldn't have left so soon. But now I see that the distance was also my way of coping. Valentina looked at Giulia, emotional. I wanted so much for you to be there. But I never said it because I thought you didn't care. Giulia reached out to hold her sister's hand. I've always cared, Val. I just didn't know how to show it. Anna brought the father's piece closer to the family unit, but still kept it slightly apart. And now, how does it feel to see him here? Clara sighed, her trembling hands resting on her lap. I feel anger. He left us and everything fell apart. I tried to hate him, but deep down, I think I always hoped he'd come back. Valentina wiped a tear, her voice trembling. I did too. I always thought that if I were good enough, he would change his mind and come home. Anna looked at Giulia, who was silent. And you, Giulia? Giulia took a deep breath. I think I gave up on him even before he left. I saw how he treated you, Mom, and I knew he wasn't really present. When he left, I felt relieved, but also guilty for feeling that way. Anna adjusted the father's piece to a neutral position. He made his choices. Those choices belong to him, not to you. Each of you has carried something from that abandonment, but now it's time to give that weight back. Clara closed her eyes, letting tears fall freely. I tried to be strong, but I think I never let go of that pain. Maybe it's time to do so. Anna turned to Valentina. And you, Valentina? Valentina looked at the father's piece for a long moment before answering. I think I always tried to fill the space he left, but now I see that was never my responsibility. Anna moved Valentina's piece closer to Giulia's, creating balance between the sisters. And what about the two of you? How does this feel? Giulia and Valentina exchanged glances and Giulia replied, I feel like we can truly be together now, without the weight of the past between us. Valentina nodded, a faint smile appearing on her face. Yes, it feels lighter. Anna adjusted all the pieces, creating a final configuration where each woman was balanced, with the father distant but acknowledged in his place. This is your family now, each of you in your rightful place, each with your own space, and with the possibility of looking toward the future, without carrying what doesn't belong to you. Clara looked at her daughters, her face lit by a genuine smile. For the first time, I feel like I can breathe. Valentina held her mother's hand. And I feel like we can start over. Giulia joined the gesture, holding Clara and Valentina's hands. Yes, together. As they left Anna's office, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara, Valentina, and Giulia walked side by side in silence, their hearts feeling lighter. Thank you, girls, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. for giving me this chance. Thank you for accepting, Mom, Giulia replied with a smile. Valentina looked at the horizon, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she believed the future could be different, lighter, happier.